Gunfire ripped through the trees without warning. Mud splashed as boots slipped. Men shouting orders that no one could hear over the artillery pounding the valley. A radio screamed with static, then cut out mid-sentence. She ran anyway. Her breath came in sharp bursts. Chest burning, fingers numb as she gripped a leather satchel that was never meant to leave headquarters. Tracer rounds tore through branches overhead. Somewhere behind her, metal screamed as a vehicle exploded, and then came the order. Not shouted, not debated. Simply delivered, send her in. Everyone in the command tent knew what that meant. No extraction plan, no backup, no return route. A suicide mission. But as she disappeared into the darkness, carrying documents no one else was allowed to read, something went wrong, something one could have predicted. Because she didn't just come back alive, she came back with evidence. No one was meant to see, and when her report reached command, the room went silent. Because it proved the mission was never about the enemy at all. And then, something impossible happened. Western Europe, winter 1944, the front lines were shifting fast. Entire villages vanished overnight. Intelligence reports contradicted each other. Maps changed faster than ink could dry. At the center of this chaos was a young female intelligence courier. Trained to move unseen, officially listed as support staff. Unofficially used for missions, too sensitive to record. Her job was simple on paper: deliver sealed intelligence packets between forward, units, and regional command. But this mission was different. The documents she carried were stamped with markings few officers recognized. No unit name. No signature. Just a red diagonal slash, a classification used for material that officially did not exist. What was at stake wasn't just troop movement, it was the safety of entire divisions, the exposure of a covert operation, and the lives of civilians. Living near the border zone if she failed, command would deny the mission ever happened. If she succeeded, someone powerful stood to lose everything. But no one told her that, and no one noticed the detail hidden in the briefing map. A detail that suggested the real threat hadn't even appeared yet. Asterisk. The shift didn't come with an explosion, it came with silence. Inside the forward communications tent, the usual chaos of overlapping radio chatter suddenly thinned. Operators leaned closer to their headsets, fingers hovering above switches, sensing something was wrong before anyone could explain it. Then the static changed, not louder, not quieter, different. A narrow band frequency, one that hadn't been officially used in months, flickered alive. At first, it sounded like atmospheric interference, wind, electrical hiss, random noise bouncing off the terrain. Most operators would have ignored it. One didn't, because buried inside. The static was rhythm, 3 short bursts, 1 long pause, then 2 more. A pattern. The operator's face drained of color as he slowly straightened in his chair. He adjusted the dial, isolating the signal, and suddenly the noise resolved into something far more disturbing. A coded transmission. The phrase was short. Barely 6 seconds, but it carried a weight that froze. The room, it was a recognition code. 1. That had been retired early in the war, one that only 3 specialized units had ever been trained to use, and one of those units had been officially disbanded after a classified disaster. No one talked about. The message ended abruptly. No signature. No call sign. Just coordinates. Coordinates that made no sense until someone overlaid them onto the operational map. The room went still because the coordinates aligned precisely with her current route. Not a supply road. Not a fallback position. Not a known battlefield objective. Her route, a courier path logged as low-risk low priority, and deliberately unremarkable. This wasn't supposed to happen, someone whispered. A senior intelligence officer stepped forward, eyes locked on the map. His voice was tight, controlled, but shaken. This frequency should be dead. Another officer demanded verification. A second radio check confirmed it. The transmission was real, clean, precise, and deliberately timed. That's when the implications began to surface. Someone knew she was there. Someone knew exactly where she was going, and worse, someone had planned for. Orders began colliding. Instantly, one commander slammed his fist on the table, demanding immediate extraction. Another argued the transmission could be enemy deception. A third insisted on radio silence to avoid revealing positions. The debate escalated, voices overlapping, tension rising until a new voice cut through the room. Calm, measured, authoritative. A voice that didn't belong to anyone's schedule to be on that channel. Negative on extraction, the voice said. Let her proceed. The room fell silent. Heads turned. No one asked who had spoken, because everyone recognized the authority behind the tone, but no one remembered seeing that officer enter the tent. The intelligence chief hesitated, then asked the question no one wanted to hear answered. On whose authority? There was a pause. Then the reply came. Above your clearance. That was the moment the mission transformed. Until then, she had been a courier, expendable. Yes, but still protected by protocol. Now she was bait. The realization spread slowly, like cold water seeping into boots. This transmission wasn't a warning, it was a confirmation. A signal sent not to stop her, but to mark progress, as if someone, somewhere, had been waiting to see whether she would reach that point. Junior analyst quietly noticed another detail on the decoded strip, a secondary marker embedded in the signal. Something unnecessary for basic communication, eh? TIMESTAMP. Not when the message was sent, but when it was expected to be received, which meant the sender knew exactly when she would be. There down to the minute. The operator swallowed hard. If this is accurate, he said, then the next transmission window closes in 90 seconds. No one replied, because they all understood what that meant. If she survived the next 90 seconds, the mission would continue. If she didn't, there would be no record she ever existed. The radio crackled once more, then went dead, and somewhere beyond the lines, unaware of the countdown ticking down around her, she moved forward into terrain no longer defined by maps, and the next 90 seconds would determine whether anyone survived. Asterisk, the forest changed first, not suddenly. Not dramatically, it changed in a way that made her question whether it ever felt safe at all. The trees grew closer together, the deeper she moved. Trunks thick and dark with moisture, their branches locking overhead like interlaced fingers. Fog crept low along the ground, rolling in slow, deliberate waves, swallowing her boots with every step. Sound behaved strangely here, too dampened in some directions, too sharp in others. She stopped, listened. Nothing, no birds, no distant shouting, no engines, only the faint, irregular thud of artillery, far away, not close enough to map, not far enough to ignore. The rhythm was wrong. Not part of any coordinated barrage she recognized. She checked her radio again, dead. The handset crackled briefly, as if teasing her with the promise of connection, then fell silent. She adjusted the antenna, switched channels, rechecked the battery. Everything was functional except the signal. It was as if the air itself refused to carry. Her voice, she lowered the radio slowly, every instinct screaming the same truth. This silence wasn't accidental. Someone had created it. She moved forward. Anyway, because stopping was worse. Every step dragged, the mud clinging to her boots like hands trying to pull her down. The weight of the satchel cut into her shoulder, strapped stiff with moisture and grime. Inside it, the document shifted with her movement, paper whispering softly, like something alive. The path ahead narrowed, funneling her between two rocky embankments that didn't appear on her map. She stopped again. Maps didn't lie accidentally. They lied when someone wanted them to. She crouched, scanning the ground tracks, multiple sets, fresh, too uniform to be panicked retreat, too orderly to be accidental overlap. Whoever had passed through here had done so recently. With purpose, she counted them. At least 8, possibly more. Boot patterns were inconsistent, different sizes. Different tread, but their spacing was precise. Military precision. Formation discipline, not enemy. Not exactly friendly either. She followed the tracks for less. A minute before the air changed again, the smell hit her first. Burned oil. Scorched earth. Something metallic, coppery, sharp. She crested a small rise and froze. The bunker sat half-sunken into the ground. Its concrete shell cracked and blackened. Smoke still curled lazily from one collapsed corner, thin and gray. Drifting upward as if unsure where to go. This wasn't fresh destruction. It wasn't old either. It was recent. But contained no outward blast marks. No shrapnel spread. No crater. This bunker hadn't been attacked. It had been neutralized. She approached slowly, weapon raised. The entrance was partially blocked by fallen debris, but there was enough space to crawl through. She hesitated only a moment before lowering herself inside. The air was thick and stale. Inside, the bunker was dark, lit only by the faint glow of embers buried beneath rubble. Equipment lay scattered, radios smashed, maps torn from walls. Ammunition boxes opened and left behind. This wasn't looting. This was selective removal. Then she saw him. The body lay slumped against the far wall, legs awkwardly twisted beneath him. He couldn't have been older than 25. His uniform was stripped of insignia, patches carefully removed rather than torn away. His face was pale, eyes wide open. Fixed on something she couldn't see, no obvious wounds, no blood pooling. His mouth was slightly open, as if he'd been about to speak or scream when something stopped him. She knelt beside him, checked for signs of life. Nothing her. Gaze dropped to his hands. He was clutching something tightly to his chest. A folder shield. She pried his fingers open gently, one by one. The stiffness already setting in. The folder came free with a faint tearing sound as the paper seal broke. Her stomach tightened. When she saw the marking, Allied. Classification, high clearance. She opened it. The first photograph nearly made her drop it. It was her, taken from behind, mid-stride, walking along a supply road she'd traveled days earlier. The second photo showed her entering a briefing tent. The third showed her receiving the satchel. Different angles, different distances, surveillance. She flipped through them quickly, heart pounding. Every image was of her, some taken from elevated positions, some from ground level, some from close enough that she should have noticed someone watching. She hadn't. Then she saw the dates. Several were stamped before the mission was officially approved. Her hands shook. This wasn't observation. This was premeditation. Someone had been tracking her. Movements long before she'd known she mattered. She scanned the rest of the folder. Recon notes. Movement logs. Timing estimates. Not enemy intelligence. Internal. She stuffed the documents back into the folder, slid it into her satchel. Pulse roaring in her ears. That's when she heard it. Footsteps, multiple approaching. Fast. She killed the light instantly and pressed herself against the wall, barely breathing. The footsteps stopped. Just outside the bunker, voices followed. Low, calm, speaking. Her language, friendly accents, relief, surged through her and nearly betrayed her. She bit it. Back, something was wrong. The cadence was off too, even too rehearsed. She listened harder. There. Boots scraped against stone as they shifted position. The sound echoed strangely to clean. She glanced down at her own boots, caked in mud. Leaves stuck to the soles. Worn. She peered through a crack in the entrance. She saw them. 4 soldiers, Allied uniforms, weapons slung low, faces expressionless. There. Boots were spotless, not a speck of mud, not a scratch. They stood there for a moment, then one of them gestured. They moved on, didn't search the bunker, didn't Call-out didn't acknowledge the body inside. They hadn't come to investigate. They had come to confirm. She waited long. After they were gone before moving, when she finally emerged, the forest felt even tighter, as if it had closed ranks behind her. Back at command. Chaos was unfolding. Maps were being redrawn in real time. Reports streamed in faster than they could be verified. Units reported contact with friendly forces that command insisted didn't exist. Aerial reconnaissance showed structures. In zones marked empty, convoys vanished between checkpoints. Then, an analyst noticed something. Pattern, disappearance points aligned in a narrow band across multiple sectors, too straight to be random, too consistent to ignore. A corridor, not marked on any operational map, not assigned to any unit, yet activity clustered around it. Movement, signals, losses. The corridor intersected directly with her. Root the realization spread slowly through the room. Someone had carved a hidden, operational channel through the war, and everything that entered it stopped existing. Out in the forest, she felt it before she understood it. The sense of being guided, not chased, not attacked. Redirected. Gunfire cracked suddenly to her left, suppressive. Controlled, forcing her to move right. Moments later, fire erupted ahead. Cutting off that route, she ran the only way. Left, the firing stopped. No. Pursuit, no confirmation shots. They weren't trying to kill her, they were shaping her movement. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs screamed. Until the forest thinned and the ground leveled. Then she saw the clearing, and in the center of it, something that made her stop cold. Asterisk. The clearing was wrong, not in a way she could immediately explain, not at first glance. It looked ordinary enough. A wide patch of flattened earth surrounded by broken trees. The kind of place artillery would tear open during a retreat. Smoke hung low in uneven bands, drifting just enough to obscure distance, but not enough to conceal shapes. But the longer she stared, the more the illusion fractured. Vehicles sat scattered across the clearing. Trucks, half-tracks, a light armored carrier tipped at an angle where a shallow crater yawned beneath it. At a distance, it resembled the aftermath of a sudden engagement. Up close, it unraveled. The vehicles weren't burned in sequence. Some showed blast damage without scorch marks. Others were scorched but intact. One truck lay on its side, windshields shattered outward, as if the explosion had come from inside. She stepped forward cautiously. Her boot struck something metallic. Helmet. She picked it up. 2, clean, no dents. No blood, no impact deformation. Placed, she dropped it and moved deeper into the clearing, pulse hammering in her ears. Bodies lay scattered, some face down, some slumped against debris. Others positioned as if frozen mid-motion. She knelt beside one. Male, early 30s. Allied uniform, no wounds, no blood. His eyes were closed. She checked his pulse, nothing, but his hands were warm. She recoiled slightly. Death hadn't reached him yet. Not fully. She moved from body to body, dread rising with each one. Some had minor injuries inconsistent with lethal force. A fractured wrist. A superficial burn. A concussive mark that should have stunned, not killed. This wasn't combat, it was staging. She heard voices again, this time. Closer, she dropped behind an overturned vehicle as a squad entered. The clearing from the opposite tree line. Allied uniforms, same spotless boots. They moved among the bodies calmly, efficiently. One knelt and adjusted a fallen rifle so it pointed away from the body. Another dragged a corpse half a meter to the left. Aligning it with the crater, they weren't checking for survivors. They were correcting a scene. One of them spoke quietly. Signal discrepancy here, another replied. Mark it. Corridor integrity compromised. Her blood ran cold. Corridor, she pressed herself tighter against the vehicle, barely breathing. From her vantage point, she saw something that made her vision. Blurred one of the soldiers reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook. Inside were sketches, not of terrain, of people, faces. She recognized one immediately. Her own. She clamped a hand over her mouth to stop herself from making a sound. The soldiers finished their adjustments and withdrew as silently as they had arrived, disappearing back into the trees without a backward glance. When they were gone, the clearing felt emptier than before, like a stage after the actors had left. She realized then what this place truly was: not a battlefield, a fabrication, a reset point. Anything that went wrong inside the corridor was erased, reconstructed, and rewritten before higher command ever knew to ask questions. She backed away slowly, mind racing. Her radio crackled suddenly. She froze. A voice came through, distorted but unmistakable. Repeat. Identify your position. Command. Real command. She nearly cried out in relief, then stopped herself. She checked the frequency. Primary channel she hadn't been able to transmit for hours. How? She whispered. The voice came again, clearer now. Courier unit, identify your position immediately. She hesitated, then answered. This is courier unit. My coordinates. The transmission cut off mid-sentence. The radio hissed, then fell silent again. She stared at it in disbelief. Back at command. Alarms were sounding. Asterisk. The brief transmission had appeared on the board, then erased itself. Operators stared at blank spaces where logs should have. Bin.1 man swore he saw entries typing themselves in. Reverse. The analyst who had first identified the corridor stood pale and shaking, finger tracing lines across overlapping maps. It's not just a zone, he said quietly. It's a process. They looked at him. It corrects inconsistencies, he continued. Removes variables. It's not targeting the enemy. It's targeting unpredictability, someone whispered. Including our own people. He nodded. Outside, she ran. Not blindly, deliberately. She stopped following paths. Cut through undergrowth. Changed direction randomly, doubling back. Breaking every movement pattern she'd been trained to maintain. Almost immediately, the response shifted. Gunfire erupted. Erratic now, less controlled. Flares launched prematurely, lighting up empty ground. Orders shouted in confusion. She smiled grimly. They'd lost their grip on her, but only briefly. She stumbled into a ravine she hadn't seen on the map. The descent was steep, loose rock, sending her sliding. She hit hard at the bottom, breath exploding from her lungs. Asterisk pain flared in her side. She forced herself up. The ravine narrowed ahead, and then opened into something impossible. A road-paved breach running straight through territory. No engineering. Unit had reported working on. She followed it for several meters before realizing the truth. This wasn't a road. It was a seam, the corridor spine. She felt it, the wrongness, like pressure behind her eyes. Like standing too close to heavy machinery, she understood. Now why maps failed? The corridor wasn't fixed. It moved. It adapted. Anything inside. It could be overwritten, including her. She ran again. Harder than before, pain screaming through her body. Behind her, engines roared to life. Vehicles multiple closing. Fast. She veered off the road and plunged into the forest as headlights swept past, illuminating trees that seemed to rearrange themselves in the glare. She crossed a line without knowing. How she knew it was there? And suddenly, everything changed. The gunfire stopped. The engines faded. The forest loosened. Birds screamed into the air. Startled, she collapsed to her knees. Gasping, she was out. Behind the corridor, she didn't wait to understand how long it would stay that way. She moved until dawn bled gray into the sky, and the first Friendly perimeter appeared through the mist when they saw her. Disbelief rippled through the checkpoint. She was filthy, bleeding, carrying a satchel she should never have had. They escorted her to command without questions. Inside, silence fell as she entered. Maps were removed from walls. Eyes avoided. Hers. She placed the folder from the bunker on the table. Then the section. No one touched them. No one touched them. Finally, she spoke. "You're erasing yourselves," she said hoarsely. "And calling it control?" No one denied it. That was the moment step 4 ended, because chaos was no longer external. It had become institutional. And the war had just revealed its most dangerous weapon. Asterisk. The first thing she noticed inside command wasn't the silence. It was the way people avoided the evidence. Maps were quietly removed from the walls, not torn down, not argued over, simply lifted away as if they had never belonged there. A phone rang once, twice, then stopped. No one reached for it. She stood in the center of the room, mud still drying on her uniform, blood darkening the sleeve she hadn't bothered to bandage yet. The satchel lay open on the table, its contents exposed: photographs, reports, carbon copies, handwritten notes that should not exist. No one touched them, not because they didn't understand what they were seeing, but because they did. An officer finally cleared his throat. "You weren't supposed to make it back." The words weren't cruel. They weren't even accusatory. They were factual. She looked at him and felt something. Inside her hardened. "Then you shouldn't have sent me," she said. A few exchanged glances followed. Calculations. Not emotional, procedural. This was no longer a crisis. It was an inconvenience. She realized then that the danger hadn't ended. When she crossed out of the corridor, it had only changed shape. They moved her to a side room under the pretense of medical evaluation. A medic cleaned her wounds in silence, eyes flicking nervously toward the door. No questions were asked. No reports were filled out when she tried to speak. The medic shook his head almost imperceptibly. "Don't," he whispered. "Not here." Was given fresh water, dry clothes, a seat facing a blank wall, and then she waited. Hours passed. Outside, engines came and went. Orders were issued, countermanded, rewritten. Somewhere nearby, paper was being burned. Finally, a senior intelligence officer entered the room alone. He didn't sit. "What you encountered," he began, carefully, "was not enemy action." She said nothing. "It was an internal corrective mechanism," he continued. "A containment protocol designed to prevent strategic destabilization." She laughed once short. "Humorless. You erased people. You prevented escalation. You staged deaths. Ensured continuity." She stood up slowly despite the pain. "You turned the war into a machine that eats its own operators." His jaw tightened. "You're thinking emotionally." "Thinking factually," she replied. "You've lost control of it. That's why I was sent." He didn't deny it. That corridor, she pressed, was never meant to be permanent. It adapts. It rewrites. It removes anything it can't predict, including you. He studied her now. Really studied her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. That he said quietly, "Is why you're a problem." The words settled heavily between them. Not accusation. Diagnosis. She was escorted from the room under guard, politely, respectfully, but unmistakably detained. As they walked, she caught glimpses of controlled chaos. Officers shredding documents. Analysts rerouting communications. Clerks sealing files with stamps she'd never seen before. This wasn't damage control. This was rollback. She was placed in a temporary holding office with a single guard outside the door. The window was frosted. The clock on the wall had stopped. She checked her satchel. Someone had added something. A thin packet. Tucked beneath the rest, inside were updated orders, signed, authorized. Already in effect, her name appeared once, then again, then not at all. She read the final line twice. Subject reassigned. Mission status neutralized. Her pulse slowed. Not fear, clarity. She understood. Now, survival hadn't made her valuable. It had made her dangerous. Outside, she heard raised voices, an argument, then a single phrase cut through clearly. She's evidence. The guard outside shifted uncomfortably, moments later. The door opened, not violently, but decisively. 2 officers entered. Extraction orders. They said a relocation for her safety. She followed them because resistance would confirm their fears. They moved her at night. No convoy markings. No paperwork. Just a vehicle heading away from command, deeper into controlled territory. As the lights of the base faded behind them, she noticed something. Chilling, they weren't taking her anywhere. Specific, they were driving along a familiar path. A path that matched. The edge of the corridor. Her mind raced. This wasn't relocation. It was reintegration. She waited until the vehicle slowed near a checkpoint, then acted. She lunged forward, wrenching the door open as the driver swerved. Gunfire erupted. The vehicle skidded. She rolled into darkness. Pain exploding through her shoulder, she hit the ground. She ran behind her. Her orders were shouted, confused, overlapping, alive. No, stop. Do not let her cross. She crossed anyway. The sensation was unmistakable. Pressure, distortion, then release. She collapsed beyond the boundary. Breath tearing from her lungs. Behind her, the pursuit stopped. They didn't follow. They couldn't. She lay there shaking, clutching the satchel. Understanding the final truth of the escalation, the corridor was never meant to kill her. It was meant to erase her story, and she had escaped with it intact. As dawn broke, she rose and moved toward the last place left that still mattered, the archives. Because now the climax wasn't about survival. It was about whether the truth would outlive the war. Asterisk. The war did not end for her the way it ended for others. There were no cheering crowds, no liberation parades, no moments of relief. It ended in silence, in shadowed rooms, in spaces that existed beyond recognition. She reached the archives just before sunrise, when the night staff had gone and the day staff had not yet arrived. The guard barely glanced at her papers before waving her through, a routine gesture born of fatigue. Even systems designed for control could be undone by human limits. And she knew exactly how to exploit them. Inside, the air smelled of dust, ink, and old paper, the scent of permanence. This was where wars became history, where chaos was pressed into orderly columns, signatures, and margins. She did not belong here, not officially, and that made her dangerous. Moving quickly and quietly, guided by memory and instinct rather than signage, she navigated the weak points in the stacks, the misfiled reports, and the forgotten shelves no one ever checked. She understood the building's habits as well as any map or diagram. The terminal ledger awaited her as expected. Her name appeared once, twice, 3 times each, entry different, reassigned, missing, deceased. No explanation, no consistency. Ambiguity itself was protection, a weapon. She opened her satchel, spreading out the bunker photographs, corridor notes, and the handwritten message that had changed everything. Some she filed where they could be found, generating anomalies for future historians. Others she buried deep, miscatalogued, or hidden behind a false panel she knew existed. She left without alarms or pursuit. Outside, the city moved on. She vanished quietly, leaving no trace except absence. Decades later, junior archivists noticed subtle anomalies, repeated coordinates, inconsistent annotations, traces of something unexplained. Following the thread led to a thin folder containing almost nothing, only a single typed sentence. Stamped, but unsigned, she saw the corridor. Requests for clarification, access, and declassification were denied. Units tied to the coordinates quietly dissolved or were renamed. Manuals referencing related protocols were revised or removed entirely. Yet traces remained, A radio log answering itself. A map correcting terrain that was never wrong. A field report marked confirmed with no signature. Historians would debate whether the corridor was real. Some called it myth, some bureaucratic paranoia. A few suggested early automated command logic. None could explain the sections of the war with no witnesses. Soldiers who officially died twice, or operations perfectly controlled, yet undocumented. As for Herth, a woman sent on a mission no one expected to survive, there is no grave. Number confirmed photograph, no interview, no recorded testimony. Only absences. In a declassified memo decades later, a margin note read, "Subject escaped correction. Narrative incomplete. Some stories cannot be erased. They survive by refusing to end." And the truth of what she saw, the corridor, who controlled it, and how much of the war it consumed remains locked away, hidden from memory, because some knowledge is too unsettling to confront.